Welcome to Classic Game Room, where I'm reviewing one of the most popular, beloved handheld game systems ever created, and no, I'm not talking about the Gamecom. It's the Nintendo Game Boy Advance, the original one, model AGB-001. A dinosaur worth retiring or still worth playing? Let's find out. It's time to put away that fancy backlit screened Game Boy Advance SP, kids, because today we're talking about the old school Game Boy Advance. Originally released in 1898, this was powered by steam. Henry Ford had 3 of them. And rumor has it that Nintendo said you could have the Game Boy Advance in any color you want, as long as it's purple with the Target logo. Apparently I got the date wrong. This was released in 2001. And as you probably know, the Game Boy Advance comes in more colors than your average rainbow. Nintendo sold a lot of these things, and added new Game Boy Advance designs to their lineup, like the Game Boy Advance SP and the Game Boy Advance Micro. But let's talk about the old one without a backlit screen. The one that looks like this. Personally, I like the design of this thing. I find it very comfortable to play. In some ways, it's actually more comfortable than my beloved Game Boy Advance SP. For one thing, it's wider, which makes the top left and right buttons easier and more comfortable to use, especially when playing games like DK King of Swing, where you'll use them a lot. The button placement is comfortable, and the overall fit and finish of the Game Boy Advance is nice. And even without a backlit screen, it looks good. It's also really cheap. Depending on the color and condition, you can easily pick up a Game Boy Advance online for somewhere between $15 and $30, frequently with a bunch of other accessories and games. And it's the games that define the Game Boy Advance, because there's a lot of them. Hundreds of games, maybe even more than 1,000 worldwide, I'm not sure. But without region encoding, you can take your pick, import away, and play whatever you want in every conceivable genre. And of course, don't forget, it also plays old school Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. Unless you're an immortal like the Highlander or living multiple lifetimes like Jean-Luc Picard, you can't possibly find the time to play them all. But you'll have fun trying. Of course, the big question is, why go with the old Game Boy Advance instead of the newer backlit Game Boy Advance SP? Well, for 2 reasons. 1, it's cheaper, and B, sometimes games came with accessories that would fit on top of the Game Boy Advance, which don't fit onto the Game Boy Advance SP. Like this one, sent to the show by our friend Felicity in Worcestershire, England. Hopefully I pronounced it right that time. Maybe. Which I can't read because it's in Japanese, but it looks like Skylanders mixed with Mario Kart, which looks pretty good. The old Game Boy Advance SP may not be backlit, but it does motion well, which is important for fighting and driving games. If you have a lot of light, you can easily play one of these and see what's going on screen. Now, I definitely prefer the backlit Game Boy Advance SP. A lot. I love the Game Boy Advance SP. I prefer the D-pad on my SP. It has a nicer backlit screen and its own built-in rechargeable battery. But if you're on a tight budget, or if you want to play games with the original accessories that fit on top, the old Game Boy Advance still does a fabulous job, as long as you have a lot of light. But Mark, I live in a black hole. Well, move. They're cheap, they're plentiful, they're built like a tank with crap loads of games and accessories. It's the Nintendo Game Boy Advance.